Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome, Tzvi.
Thank you, Eli. Thanks for having me.
I'm sitting here with Tzvi Haber, visiting from Los Angeles, California.
Yeah, quick 24-hour trip.
What? Well, it's nice you can come from communist California to Miami in a short trip.
I grew up in Miami and then moved to communist California. Not as easy of a move.
Yes. Okay, listen, there's space here. I know a house for sale not far from here if you
Okay. It's a beautiful neighborhood. I definitely would consider it.
Okay, so where should we start? Let's start with your story. You mentioned that we have I don't know much about you, right? We're finding out here. There was a few friends in common, and Yossi Lichi, who was kind enough to introduce me to a lot of the wonderful guests we've had on this podcast, said I should speak with Tzvi.
Okay, that's fair. So I can't speak for him, but he was an amazing conversation I had with him. But yeah, my story, I guess, grew up in Miami, South Florida. My father was the principal of the Hebrew Academy in Miami.
Oh, cool.
He was nifter when I was 1. My mom was pregnant with my little sister. 6 of us. And kind
Let's
of...
get the mic just a little bit more.
For sure.
A little up towards you. Yeah.
Better? Okay.
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah, keep going. Don't worry,
So,
that'll be perfect.
we, grew up in Miami Beach. My grandfather was like, his name was Saif the Knife, gave everyone their bris milas all across South Florida and South America. So my family had some relevance in Miami. My dad passed away in a car accident going to Eretz Yisrael. So I grew up in a system that really had a lot of reverence for my father, wanted to do everything to make sure we were okay. I learned this through some of the work I've done, but by how many people telling me how special my dad was and how amazing, I'm going to be, etc., was, I dealt with helping people cope since I've been 1, but realistically being able to find that inside me at the age of 6, like playing Legos in a IFS session, and like was really able to get imagery around that and connect to that.
What do you mean by that?
So I go on retreats a few times a year, and through those retreats, one of the ones I went on was one of not understanding where my ability to connect with people come from and where I thrive off of and what gives me my juice. And what we came to and what imagery I got was falling into sitting on my living room floor, playing Legos and just watching people come in and out of the room, coming to, quote, console me. But it was really me consoling them at that age and letting them know it'll be okay because I'm okay, as long as they're okay. And it was really cool to see that process play out and kind of reverse my thought process with it and see that happen in real time.
So what did that mean to you? I want to make sure that I'm understanding the
So what it meant to me and what it means to me still till today, it was this idea that it wasn't them coming and checking how I was doing. It was them coming to make themselves feel whole, that their loss their grief was being heard and being felt, because the only way they could is by being there for me, as well as by me being there for them. But for me, it wasn't, I'm 6. There's no way for me to connect on that level emotionally.
So today you still see a lot of the work you do as a continuation of that?
It was for a very long time in an unhealthy way. Now I see it in a very healthy way, as being able to take that skill that was developed, that bracha, that blessing, and being able to turn it on its head. I believe that everything I've gone through in my life has the opposite side of it, whether positive or negative. And that's just one example of, how that gets there, So went through my life like kind of playing basketball, thinking, I always say that in my AA spiel, I say like, I'm the guy that goes to that graduated high school thinking he was going to make it to the NBA until he realized he was white and Jewish, and what that really meant for me. but went through, high school. I couldn't read until I was 26 years old. I had a first grade reading level until I was 26. Actually, when coming here, a little intimidation factor of like the ability of your articulation compared to mine, and excited for it because it challenges me and where I'm at in my life today. And yeah, went to Israel for a year, went to yeshiva, tore my knee, got prescribed some Oxycontin, and next thing I knew, I was off to the races, kind of wrecking havoc, and ended up in treatment at the age of 20.
So that was your drug of choice, so to speak?
Yeah, it started that way. It was, obviously I didn't see the half a bottle of Jack that I would drink on Shabbos or going out on Thursday and Saturday nights as an issue at that point in my life. Right. But everyone else saw where these oxys were taking me and felt that I needed help. And I did not like how it made me feel at that moment in my life. So agreed to go to treatment, went to treatment, left after 80-something days, and never had an intention of staying sober. Married, kid along the way, and 5 years after that, needing treatment again.
Again for Oxycontin.
For Oxycontin, and this time it evolved into heroin, and really it was, at that point, it was the idea of not wanting to, live. There was nothing that was worth living for except my child at that moment in my life. The most amazing wife, not knowing it, but just didn't want my child to go through what I had to go through. Wife catches me, still come up with lies for many months, and kind of got pushed into rehab.
Let's sit on that for a minute.
Yeah.
So when you say your wife caught you and come up with many lies, can you drill down a little bit? The reason I'm asking is because, as it happens, last week a woman reached out to me that her husband was, I think she caught him on something with porn, some sort of sites, paying for something online. And the way she was talking was that, her husband is a special kind of sick. So when I was communicating with her, I said, no, this is pretty much all addicts. Right? What you're describing is a phase of the addiction, and God willing, he'll move into the next phase of healing. But anyone you see who's healed from addiction has been in that phase of denial and lying. And it didn't matter if they were caught red-handed, right? There was still another lie that was able to be manufactured or generated in order to protect the addiction until such time as they were ready to let go, and then the healing could take root. So I just thought it'd be helpful if you can drill into some of that, because in case that person happens to be listening,
of course,
they'll know that all is not over for them
sure
just
not.
because their husband lied.
And I would say you use the term special kind of sick, right? And I think that every family member, it is a special kind of sick, because now it's the sickness that you have to deal with, right? So it does feel special in that way and unique. But yeah, the idea of the lies were in so deep, it didn't matter. I think about the time that I took my daughter with me to go pick up. It still is ingrained in my brain. Thank God I've been able to forgive myself from there, but she's 1 year old and I'm taking her to a drug dealer's house. It doesn't make sense to me. It's so far from what I was brought up with, and then so far from what my conscience is okay with. How did I get there? But yeah, my wife had no clue I was using any substances throughout our entire marriage up until that point. So when I say
how many years of marriage?
It was 3 years at that point, 2.5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of secrecy and a lot of lies.
Oh yeah, like I used the bathroom and I used to lock the door, and I used to say that I'm shy while going to the bathroom. Like today, my door's wide open. Like there's no shyness to it with her. Like we're one, right? We really are one. So like to think that I was able to manipulate in that way and really convey this message of like my space, your space. Just don't go into my space. I'll leave you in your space. You tell me what boundary you want. I'll hand it over, And another one was I used to have rolled up dollar bills and I used to leave it on the counter. I look back at these things and say, I subconsciously was begging for help. I didn't understand it in the moment. And she would say, what are these? What is that? I'd say, you see them all the time. I roll them up. It's like my good luck charm. When I'm thinking, I roll up dollar bills. And she coming from an amazing family, never really had anything like this in her life, totally believed it, because why would her husband lie to her?
Right.
Until, Erev Shabbos, she opens up the bathroom door because I stopped locking it because I want to get caught. I'm desperate for getting caught. And the house crumbles. And now...
Be specific. Just
yeah, sorry.
So you're saying she walks into the bathroom and sees you doing
and
heroin.
sees me, doing a line of oxy at the moment.
Got it.
Yeah. And that was Friday, sometime in late March of 2013. And for the next 3 months, she was in search of more. She was in the search of, how do I help my husband? What do I do? And tried to get certain people involved. Talked about, this will be the last time I do it. Shabbosim of detoxing. Months until June 12, 2013 came around. But months of manipulation after manipulation.
Did she know that 5 years before you were in rehab? Was that part of the story you shared with her?
Yeah.
So she knew that, but you presented
she
it as
knew that, and she
as
knew
a thing of the past.
Exactly. Knee surgery, I was an athlete. I hurt myself, and really it was nothing. It was something that we all should forget about.
Right.
That's how I landed up in LA. That's how I met you. Look at the Shkata Pratis. Look at the divine providence of it.
Yeah, I spoke to a guy a few years ago he told his wife he had some sort of severe stomach illness as a way to justify the amount of hours he spent in the bathroom. And for years, his wife thought this was going on until eventually he came clean and explained that there was an illness, but it wasn't a stomach illness.
Yeah.
It was a mental
It wasn't
illness.
Crohn's. It wasn't Crohn's.
It was pornography addiction, yeah.
It's, So.
Yeah. No, I just think it's important that people, as much as possible, see that, because I think it's important for those who are going through the process that those close to us don't lose hope.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important reason why I share my story, and I'm sure you as well. It's cool in recovery, they call it ESH, right? Experience, strength, and hope. To share your esh, which in Hebrew is fire. But I don't know that they made the connection.
I love that. Well, there's always some sort of connection. Maybe they don't know it.
Oh, you didn't know the connection either?
I didn't know
it's
that.
Your first time hearing that?
First time hearing it.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing, actually. I might have to steal that one. Okay.
I thought it was something people knew.
It might be a South Florida thing,
No, it's possible. It was so obvious.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone ever spoke to me about it. It was just...
I love it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
People would say, he's sharing his ESH, right? So I just... I understood that the connection is there. His
beautiful.
Experience, strength, and hope.
I love that. All right. If I got one thing out of tonight, it's that. Wow. Yeah, okay. I love these things.
Nice.
So yeah.
So that began your journey of recovery.
And so I would say that my desire to get sober, or whatever term anyone wants, clean, abstinent of my drug of choice, was so far-fetched, because thinking of living without it was like a joke. I'm smiling today because it literally was a joke at that time in my life. It was like, you don't know what I have to live with. Like, my dad died when I was 1. I lived on my own when I was 14. God, you made me an addict, and now you want me to do all the work to get clean? Like, are you at it? Like, what type of relationship do you think this is? This is not how we go about it. And at that point in my life, I was davening 3 times a day. I was the guy, and I did everything kosher, Shabbos, to what I was the guy when I was using that would crush pills prior to Shabbos, because you weren't allowed to crush on Shabbos.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Right.
I wanted to have the connection. I knew that. I didn't know how, but I wanted it. So I at that point, it's actually our mutual friend that we were talking about in the house. He gets married, and we leave his wedding, we leave South Florida, and on the plane ride home, my wife said, your bags are going to be packed in about 14 hours, and you're not coming back to the house until you're sober. Your sister's going to pick you up at the airport, and I'm going to take our daughter Still get emotional till today. I'm going to take our daughter and go to where, go to where we're safe. But you're not going to be in our house tomorrow, tonight when the sun goes down. I went to my sister's house. Her and my brother-in-law take me to a detox center, put me in a detox center. The detox center calls at 8 o'clock the next morning saying there's a $5,000 deductible and we need it paid so then we can help your brother-in-law. And, like every good addict, I heard enough people in my life to where they said, oh, yeah, good luck. We'll come pick him up. And they gave me an ultimatum and they said, look, we're going to allow you the privilege of detoxing in our house with our 5 kids screaming at 6 a.m. every morning. And if you don't do it, like, you go figure it out. But you're going to detox here with nothing. You're not allowed to even hit a joint, nothing, like cold turkey. And Friday there's a bed at the treatment center and you're going to go Friday. And that's what the plan is. I didn't.
So I want to make sure I understand the story. So you were at detox center. They say it's $5,000. No one was willing to put it up. You go back.
Yeah. At my sister's house.
Detox for that week.
On a floor like this, on a little mattress, no medication, no, nothing, no comfort in the way that now we see, and no really understanding of what I was really going to go through. And
then that Friday to go to a different treatment center.
And I was going to go to, a treatment center in LA.
That wouldn't have this deductible.
Yeah, it's without plugging too many, the Chabad treatment center.
Gotcha.
So there's, thank God, a beautiful community that helps when needed.
Beautiful. Okay, so you went to that treatment center.
Yeah. Went there thinking I was going there for 28 days. Have a life, wife, kid, got to get back to work. 6 months later, I am still there, and I am convinced throughout the stay that it would be the best thing for me. As I'm there longer, I see myself being able to do this thing more and more, being able to see myself for who I really am at that moment and for who I could be. During that time, there were passes. You could go out on, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You had some times that you could pick. And at this point, before I went into rehab, I was told, you really want to question your relationship with God, with the Eibishter. You really want to decide, like, what is your connection. Like, you're pretty angry. And what do you mean I'm angry? Of course I'm angry. Who wouldn't be angry? Someone suggested, like, maybe you should stop doing some things associated with religious practices to find your...
In a Chabad treatment center, you got this.
Well, this was prior to stepping in there. In the Chabad treatment center, I would assume that some people would suggest that. I was a counselor there at one point after a couple of years of sobriety, and there's never been a time where I've suggested someone stops, but I've look at your relationship and ask yourself if it's a relationship or if it's just practices.
Yeah, interestingly, someone asked me the question point blank last week.
Yeah.
If they should stop putting on tefillin because I don't remember the exact terminology they used, but they felt like when they didn't do it, it created a lot of negative emotion. And which means when they did do it, it was kind of to avoid this negative emotion. And they asked me what I think about it. And I said, well, far from me to tell someone not to do any of these things. I'll just share my own experience and do with it as you please. Is at some point in time, I think this was probably pre-recovery. I was in therapy, I was doing other things, but I don't think I was in recovery yet. And I realized that I had a lot of guilt around tefillin when I missed it. Even though I was missing pretty often, I just had a lot of guilt
like us all
around it. And it occurred to me that guilt had become almost one with tefillin. It was inherent to it. I'm doing it to avoid guilt. I'm approaching this relationship with tefillin or with God through tefillin with guilt. And maybe I should stop tefillin until there is no guilt, and then I can resume tefillin without the guilt. And it made sense to me at the time, and it took a while, many, many months of not doing it, despite the fact that there was negative emotion, and then eventually coming back to it without it. And I'm not recommending that for anyone, but for myself, I found it useful.
So I'll say.
So this was a specific recommendation that you got too.
So it was from a rabbi, and it was a recommendation. He didn't say specifically stop tefillin, stop keeping kosher, stop keeping Shabbos, but it was, hey, you really should look at your practices, and I think that while you're in rehab, you're allowed to figure out your connection to those practices. So I took that as a heter because you opened the door for me.
Take the opportunity to explore.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess in some ways you weren't doing that much differently with your wife, right? You were stepping away from the relationship by being in rehab as a way to eventually resume a proper relationship, have your family.
I actually saw it, and I still see it till today, as I was actually stepping into a relationship with both of them without knowing it at the time.
Right, by stepping away.
By stepping away, I was stepping in, right? And I think one of my favorite connection points to the God of my understanding is tefillin today, is only because of my experience within it. And I was talking about those passes. So at 5 months, and I want to share this because I think it goes hand in hand with what you were saying, is at 5 months, as a good addict that I was, I snuck a phone into the rehab and had it under my sink and would coordinate with my wife when she was going to come pick me up. Because at that point, they were allowing me to transition home. So like go help with the kid for a few hours, eat dinner with my wife alone, and then come back. So I was coordinating with her, and we got into a fight. And this was after I've just did a fifth step. I feel like I'm riding high, clean, I'm energetic. I'm on a wave that, a cloud that no one's going to stop me. I have this connection with God at this point, and the God of my understanding has me on this cloud, and nothing could do anything to me. And we get into this fight, and
you and your wife.
Yeah, and this cloud just drops, and I, hit the floor, smash my face open, and I didn't know what to do, and I'm gonna go meet her. And we've worked so hard in therapy to gain this trust in each other. We worked so hard on all these things, and I realized it wasn't necessarily I was fighting with her. I actually was fighting with God. I didn't even realize it in that moment. So when I hung up the phone, my ego at this point is still only 5 months sober. It doesn't want to call and be like, hey, maybe it wasn't towards you. So I'm trying to figure out what to do. And in the Chabad Treatment Center, there's this little shul. And for 5 months, I did not step into this shul. My room was here. The shul was across the hall. Literally, I walk out of my room and I could see the Aron Kodesh from my room. And I decided in that moment to walk across. And I put my hand where the Torah was on the Aron Kodesh, and I said, God, I know you're God. I worked so hard to get to this point, but I feel like I have no tools to talk to you. I don't know why, but every time I talk, I don't feel like you hear me. I need a tool. Could you please give me a tool? I leave, whatever. We end up going to lunch, and I was wearing like basketball shorts and I was going to go play basketball while my kid was at the park for a few hours. So I was dressed like to play ball, and I'm a pretty big guy. And at that point I didn't have, any facial hair. So to me, I didn't look Jewish. Obviously, I don't know if you're familiar with LA, but I'm on Melrose at Schwartz's Bakery. It's like, they had the best poppers then. But so I walk into Schwartz's Bakery, backwards hat. I'm ready to order some poppers. And a shliach walks right past me and says, hey, you put on the film today? And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this guy like, do you not know that I've had her not to put on the film? Like, why are you even asking me? Like, shouldn't you guys be coordinating this thing? And he's like, oh, it's fine, don't worry. And he started walking out. And it clicked. I literally just asked you guys. I literally just asked how I could talk to you. And you put this in my life. And my response then out loud was, you're a sicko. And my wife said, why? Who's a sicko? And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that out loud. I said, I love you. You got to give me a minute. And I ran and got him and put on tefillin and been putting on every day since then.
Nice.
So it's just something like that like for me brought me back in a real like connective way. That when I want to talk to God, all I have to do is really put on my tefillin. At least that's my story.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just to go back to that conversation I had with the gentleman, because it's just ironic, so to speak, that this conversation is happening now, because I don't think I've ever got the question from anyone. At this point blank, I don't even know why he would ask me. Like, do you think I should stop putting on film? What am I going to say to that? But it's interesting that we're having this conversation now. And what I shared with him is that I think everything is intention. I really think, we get caught up a lot in the actions of something, but intention is much more important than actions in a lot of ways. Like, what's the reason I'm doing something? Because usually that's going to materialize. For example, we've all heard stories. I don't know how you grew up. I grew up Chabad and nonstop hearing stories about the Baal Shem Tov and who praised the simple Jew, which my understanding of the simple Jew is a Jew who didn't necessarily have perfect actions, but he had pure intentions. And that he was meant to be elevated, as opposed to the Jew maybe who was learning Gemara in order to, offend someone, to embarrass someone in Shul on Shabbos.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that a lot goes back to intention, and in that case, stepping away from the tefillin, if the intention was saying, okay, how do I get closer? In much the same way as a relationship, like you said, stepping away from your...
Yeah, and I would say I had the
family.
wrong intention. It was to express my anger, for me at least. And I still feel like it was, for me, the right decision. And again, I'm not a rabbi. I'm not going to give anyone a heter.
I think expressing anger is very important.
I agree.
I don't do it as much now, but for a while when I don't do it at all really, but for a while whenever I sponsored people in recovery, as a rule, I didn't intentionally go in with this, but at some point in time it always came up where I would recommend 2 letters that people write. And one was a letter to their addiction, thanking them for their addiction, which very few people had a problem with it. They thought it was some sort of sacrilegious exercise where we're thanking addiction, especially if it's pornography, it's an avera, how can we be thanking? I said, okay, but maybe you did it to save your life. Who knows where your life would have been without pornography as a teenager? Where would your life be without Oxycontin? We don't know.
I say it all the time. Oxy saved my life for many, many days in a row.
Right.
Very grateful for it.
Yeah, there's a reason we did it.
100%.
Yeah, and then at some point in time, it became unhelpful, but at least we had tools and a support system to be able to get by without it. So one is thanking it, because if not, it was a friend who could have who's very likely saved our life. Otherwise, we wouldn't have engaged in something that risky and dangerous unless there was a trade-off we were getting that was better. And for many ways, Patrick Harn says this. He's well-known in the sex addiction community. He says that every addict believes that their drug of choice is their most important need. And we're operating with that belief, and in many ways it has become that. It's a safe place. So if at some point in time we come to the conclusion this is wrecking our life, to just throw this friend who's helped us out on his ass without even saying thank you. They were coming by. It's not so nice, and he might be pretty offended. He might stick around longer. So say thank you so much and goodbye. Yeah. So I would recommend to everyone say thank you and goodbye. And the other was, I've termed this differently at different points in my journey. I'll probably be more diplomatic now, but a letter to God that started off with clearly expressing our profound anger at God. So whatever that sounded like, God, I hate you, God, I'm angry at you. And again, that may sound sacrilegious to some, but I think that if that's where someone is, right, like this guy, whoever you spoke to, picked up on the fact that you were particularly angry at God. So if that was your truest feeling, to walk in and say, Baruch Hashem, that wasn't what you were feeling. You weren't feeling thank you for giving chickens intelligence or for giving you all your needs. No, what felt most true was, why the hell did you take my father away from me when I was 1 year old? And then you have all this list of demands for me. Like that's the truest form of expression, which is actually investing in a relationship. If we're avoiding that, we're avoiding a real relationship. We're just bypassing it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that even till today, it's important for me to express when I feel slighted by God. For me. Because without knowing that I feel slighted, I can't work through it and actually see that it might not be a slight, right?
Correct.
Because, inferiority conflicts with feeling inferiority, but the ego the size of the moon, right? Like you need to balance that. And for me, I've only been able to find something bigger than myself to be able to balance that in the appropriate way. Right. So when I have anger towards it, it'll slide in those directions if I don't allow it to stay present in my life.
It'll slide in.
I'm saying my relationship with God will slide based on my experiences, right? So for me, I need to get that balance. It's not an emotional decision. It's finding that balance and finding what is my part in things, right? And being able to see that, for example, like you talk about the blessing of addiction, the majority of people that I know that have balance within their recovery do thank God for their addiction.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm saying that same
you're
concept.
saying to balance that also?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the same is true in a relationship with God. You're saying to balance that as well. That if I'm feeling disappointment, you should be able to hear it from me.
Yeah, to be able to express it. And then just like my child, I want my child, I have 4 young children. I want them to express their disappointment so then I could either show them why maybe they shouldn't be disappointed, or, you know what? Yeah, you're allowed to be disappointed here, because sometimes there's the other swing of things, like where you get something that doesn't make sense, right? And that balance, or I should say that weighing of the scales is really important in my recovery, in my relationship with God.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I interviewed someone. Her name is Sterna Suissa. She's a parenting expert coach. And I asked her, how would someone know if they're, like, what would be a sign of a healthy home or a healthy family? And she said, if kids are very expressive in front of their parents, even negative emotions, then that would be a sign that they feel comfortable, they feel healthy. So if there's just kind of waves of emotion, so to speak, amongst kids, obviously age appropriate, it's gonna be a real difference if we see a 20-year-old throwing a tantrum and a 4 or 5-year-old. But the fact that a 4 or 5-year-old could show the highs and excitement of their day followed by profound disappointment, Dad, I hate you, right? That kind of expression is actually a sign of, in her world, was a sign of a healthy relationship, which if we parallel that with the most common metaphor of the relationship with God, which is parent and child, there should be room for that. There should be room to express profound disappointment, hurt, hate, anger.
For sure. And I think just like you said, at 4 or 5, having that God, I hate you moment, right? Maybe not 10 years, at 10, you should be able to, like, that's not maybe the same health. I think the same thing goes in recovery. Like when you write that initial letter that you had people write, like, God, I hate you is totally appropriate at that point. I think as someone retains abstinence or retains, growth along the way, it should turn from maybe God, I hate you to like, God, I don't understand why you would do this, right? And then God, how did we get into this position again? And then God, and the question evolves because my maturity and my relationship with God has totally evolved from God, I hate you to God, I trust you, but I don't understand why you'd put us in this position. Like, what fun are we having today?
Right. The sponsor I had who shared that with me, he says, like, when communicating with God, use more questions than statements. Right. So, meaning be open to a response back. So if there's anger, if there's hate, if there's disappointment, then don't just end it with, you are such a, I am so. Ask the question, kind of like you did, and say, hey, I want a tool to be able to connect with you and see what happens, because sometimes magic happens. Yeah.
Are you familiar with right hand, left hand work?
Yes, there was someone at the House of More, which did a exercise a couple years ago. Okay.
So that also has, like, I've done it more with like parts, like through parts work, but that to me also is like an amazing exercise to express yourself with like the same type of conversation of growth within that, and seeing the growth and the expression of anger to self and how you truly feel in that moment, etc. Yes.
There are a few people I've interviewed who are Breslev, and it seems to be in Breslev community, it's taught very well. Really? The Hespedidus and the personal relationship and speaking in one's own language and having a personal conversation and say, God, we got to sort this out.
I love
got to sort this out. But I didn't come across that. I only encountered that in recovery for the first time. I actually read this.
To be able to express the hate or anger.
Anything. Like, the reason why I say hate is because if we're in addiction, deep in the throes of addiction, there's most likely an incredible amount of rage inside us.
Oh yeah.
And properly placed, that rage goes towards God. So meaning if there's someone we're holding responsible for our life and we're pretty angry about it, then that's where it goes. So in that moment, the truest expression is, I'm angry, I hate you, whatever it is, right? Some lashing out. And then over time, it can turn into a full-on conversation. Hey, this is where I am. And, help me out. And things happen. I don't know how to say it, but...
Couldn't have said it better. Things happen is the best way to sum anything that is intangible, right? You can't... I always try to have people explain to me experiences with anything therapeutic in nature. And one of my favorite... It's like... You have to do it. I can't explain it, right? Like they used to say, like, you go to a meeting, they're like, I wish I could bottle up my recovery and give it to you to drink, or I wouldn't do it. So then you have that experience, whatever those, corny sayings are that attract the functionality of me having a larger desire to save my own life, right? Whatever the verbiage that they would use to get. And that today has become like one of my favorite things. And it always asks me, like, okay, like, how are we going to experience? Like, how do we find that, right? And what is it that I'm looking for to be able to obtain that? Or how have I obtained that differently, right? Because
You're saying that state of peace and...
Whatever it could be. It could be, one of the things I was... you talk about jumping in the cold plunge, which, by the way, I brought my bathing suit, and we'll talk about.
You're ready for
it. But I have a very hard time in that initial stage of getting in. So I was really disappointed in myself. Like, hold on, I'm willing to do anything. Like, literally, put it in front of me, I'll do it. I did it with drugs, and now I try to do it in growth. And so, like, I found this place, Cryo Lab. And they have this thing that you go to 0 degrees and you wear these gloves and you wear socks, and it's the same. And I could do it for 5.5 minutes. I could do it longer than the 3.5 minute dunk, And I have found that effect that through breath in cold. Now I still haven't had. Well, you won't understand until you do 3.5 in water, right? And that's I guess that's the human element of growth also, right? Of you won't understand me until you experience, I think. Yeah. And I think in 12-step specifically, like it's used so loosely that it sometimes in a extreme, it could go extreme the other way. And I think in other experiences, at least I've seen it as an isolation tool from connectivity with another human in terms of relatability of that growth period, if that makes sense, or that growth tool.
I didn't follow.
Okay, so if my tefillin story, your tefillin story, two totally different stories.
Yes.
But when you said your story, I connected so deeply to that idea of, just not being connected and then feeling connected, right? It didn't matter how I got there, how you got there. What. So from my experience, people listen to the words that are being shared, not to the experiences that are being felt, right? That, like they talk about, go to a meeting and listen to the what's the saying? Relate to the feelings being shared, not the
words being said.
Yeah. And to me, that goes down the line in most things that involve growth, including religion, right?
Right. One of the things I really enjoyed about recovery was I felt like people there, especially the old timers, obviously, but people there had a lot of confidence around it, where they weren't threatened if someone criticized, they weren't threatened if someone made a statement that was quote unquote sacrilegious. It's like, just come and you'll see. Yeah. Just come and you'll see. And that was a welcome departure from what I experienced in religion, where oftentimes people are so sensitive and so triggered if you question any of the beliefs. Like I remember I was in an S program, the sexual recovery programs, and there were kind of a redheaded stepchild in the 12 steps, because for a number of reasons. Number one, there's a lot of shame around it, but number two is a lot of people don't believe this can be an addiction, right? Especially the people who are sober from alcohol watching porn all day. They don't believe that sex could be an addiction, because that would be very dangerous for their recovery to believe that it could be. So anyway, one day a guy, he had just started coming to meetings because his wife caught him cheating on him. And I'm laughing because where his story's going. And he says, he comes into a meeting and he's early. So, he's a bundle of all sorts of emotions. Yes. And he's expressing some disappointment, some hurt that last night, as it happens, he's watching, I think it was like Dr. Phil or Dr. whatever, right? It's one of these doctors on TV. And, you couldn't make this stuff up. You wouldn't write it into a movie script. It would sound too unbelievable that this guy, a week into recovery, is sitting there watching TV with his wife and a professional psychologist sitting in front of a group of people, and somehow the topic of sex addiction comes up. And he says, "Oh, sex addiction is not a real thing. It's just something husbands say when they get caught cheating."
No, that perfect.
And this guy says it in a room, right? And he's unsure himself because he's a few days in, and just seeing the way all of us laughed, and it didn't matter whether the biggest doctor or everyone else questioned our experience or our healing or our process. A scientist could say it's not a real addiction. It's just, we know what's happening here. We know we're following these steps, and it's making our lives better. Call us whatever you want, but we feel very good about this process. And that was something that was very welcoming in that sense of, it was very welcome. I enjoyed it very much because on the one hand, they were saying, I'm very confident. And on the other hand, saying, you'll get it through experience. I'm not going to tell it to you. I'm not going to try to convince you. We're not going to debate this. It's not a Gemara class. If you come around, you'll see it. I don't know if you've heard, the second step came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So you say, first we came to the meetings. Then we came to, we woke up, and then we came to believe, right? So that the belief comes about through a process of, coming around, coming to our senses, and then slowly we develop a belief. It's not something that's proven by someone else. It's not something that, you don't use a process of elimination or any of the other tools for proving that God exists or that a higher power could heal us. It's just keep coming back. Keep coming back and open your eyes and see what comes your way.
And I find, as someone who is in long-term recoveries from substances, I couldn't agree with you more, is in the sense that, I guess I could say in terms of, I thank God I've never had an issue with that, but don't watch. I don't have that desire. I think I have an amazing, intimate relationship with my spouse, right, and don't find the need for porn, and never did in that way. I'm sure if I found that as a coping mechanism, like many other people in recovery do find, it would be that, right? And gambling could be that for me. I say this, I think I made a joke about this to a friend of mine who joined GA this past year. It's coming up on a year in a couple months, and I'm super proud of him.
Tough addiction.
And super tough addiction. I think I heard it on one of where you said, recovery has a certain amount. Recovery from substances is this period, and recovery from process addiction is 5 years or et cetera. I think it was with Sani or something like that.
That we went into it, maybe.
Yeah. And to me, I say this is that I think when I heard that, I started to laugh, because to me, I say, I'm so lucky that my addiction was substance and not process in any way. First of all, I'm seeing his journey right now with this. And I said this to you offline, but, I heard your story the first time I think you shared it publicly at JRC.
Yeah. It's like 2014 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, it was so that
was early recovery for you.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
what's it? You started recovery 2013?
Yeah.
Same. Yeah, same thing. March or April. Pesach 2013.
Yeah. So I was June 12th, 2013.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So got more in common with that. So I was just saying is that I get to see every side of it based on how I get situated in life sometimes, and I always say I'm so blessed that I was able to have an excuse for every action I had. I wasn't there. I used. I did. the gambler, what is he going to say? The money was stacked in front of my eyes. I didn't see the girl in front of me. There's no excuse, right? There's nothing tangible to hold on to. You, and then on top of that, you had to be conscious through those decisions. Me, I was getting high. Every decision I made of bringing my daughter, like I said earlier, to the drug, I was high. I can make that excuse not only to myself, but to everyone else, but I can make it to myself. It's like, hold on, when I'm in the right state of mind, I'm sober as a ghost, I still continuously make these decisions, is a scary thing going into recovery. What is the warning sign? What is the et cetera? And I'm seeing it now, and I keep saying it is, I can't wait till there's the Eli Nash of the, I know Arnie has been that in GA for a while for a lot of South Floridians, but, gambling in the community now is rampant, with it being legal in so many different states. California, the communists haven't allowed it, but New York and South Florida being, calls I get from even people who I don't even think that they've crossed the line of it. I never judge this, but friends who are just I just lost 30K yesterday and I only have 10K left in my bank. I stopped. I'm not going to do it, but how crazy is it that I let it get there? And they have nothing to do with recovery. They just know I'm their idiot friend who had to get sober, so let me express it to him. He won't share it with anybody. So, yeah.
And here you go sharing it on a podcast.
Exactly. I didn't mention your name.
Yeah, I haven't dealt with it too much, meaning even people I'm close to, but once or twice I've seen it up close, and it's a bear of an addiction.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely a difficult one. God willing, someone will at some point speak out, because I'm not sure why it is, but it is that when it comes to seeing ourselves in someone else's story, we need to see sometimes specifics.
Oh yeah.
Meaning that reminder that you said you got into recovery meetings to listen to the feelings and not the specific facts around it. Listen to the feelings behind the story and connect, relate on that level. We have to be told that. Naturally, if we don't hear our story literally verbatim, we feel like there's no connection. Even though there's a lot of, I went to a few AA meetings, sometimes out of necessity, and sometimes because I was, not because I struggled with alcohol, sometimes out of necessity that I needed a meeting, and AA was more of those than anything else. And I know they're not going to ask me a question, so I would just show up. And other times was someone I knew who needed a meeting or I thought can benefit from it, and I said, okay, I'll go with you. And whether they were struggling with drugs and alcohol, AA seemed like a good place. And once you strip out the alcohol part of it, I had a lot to learn in this place about my own addiction, not just interesting for the sake of life. I'm saying interesting for my own healing, but it took several years in an S recovery program to be able to get to the point that I can hear that AA has messages for me as well. Mm. So just to kind of reiterate your point that it's important that people it's important that someone would speak out about that, because there are a lot of people struggling with different addictions, and the more we can hear someone in our story, the easier it is for us to heal and get help. So
100%.
God willing, someone will. More people will.
Or maybe Dr. Phil will say it's not an addiction. So.
For what it's worth.
Yeah.
What I've said about that is that, none of these things are real things, right? In terms of addiction, what's an addiction? Did I become an addict all of a sudden as a new identity person? I say I'm calling myself a name, not to become an identity, but to embark on a healing journey. Mm. And so when I'm calling myself an addict, it's not to describe a problem, it's to describe the solution that I'm about to embark on. And what I found, regardless of what any scientific study says, is that the same tools that people who've called themselves addicts have used to get help, namely the 12 steps, I used and I found them helpful. So I'll call myself an addict, or, I don't anymore, but I did for a period of time because it was very, very useful.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm a 12-stepper at heart, right? I still 10 meetings weekly. I'm still sponsees. I'm about that life, as they say. But at the same token, I in the beginning of my recovery, it was, hold on, you checked into rehab for help? the only thing that's going to save your life is these 12 steps, right? Like, you can't stop drinking on Shabbos once you got to go to a meeting and do these 12 steps.
Become like evangelist for it.
Yes, because it saved my life. Like, do you understand the way I used to use? Like, if you could relate to that, there's no question. This is the only thing that works.
And that's evolved?
Tremendously. Tremendously, and more so in a way of, I don't think it's anyone's decision to make a helping decision for somebody else. So it's not my decision to tell you what you need, not your decision to tell me what I need. At the same token, I might have guidance based on experiences. And based on those experiences, I could share what could be useful to you. But yeah, I think that, I always say, like, the newcomer in anything is the scariest person, because they have so much passion behind it, and it's real, it's genuine. But what is it rooted in, and is it sustainable? And the answer is it's not sustainable, and it's most likely rooted in the simple yid, as you said, like the simple Jew, like the idea that it's it's paved with good intentions, and that's why I still attend meetings, because I don't want to just say, like, okay, you need to do it this way, right? Even though I still will say, these are the steps, and if I'm going to sponsor you, this is what we're going to do. And I stick to the steps, and I don't give any advice outside. But at this point, there's so many other people that could sponsor. I could say, hey, the book clearly states seek outside help. And I've sought out a ton, actually, anything being willing to throw my way that had sense for me, and I felt safe within, not safe emotionally, but safe within my recovery to do, I'm going to go do. And that's my experience, like, outside of the rooms.
Got it. Okay, so let's go to jump into the deep end a little bit in terms of some of the topic which you want to discuss. Yeah. I'm sure and occasionally listening to this podcast, if you have, that I often speak about my journey and experiences with plant medicine, and you had experiences or thoughts or feelings that may, on its face, contradict some of that. So I thought to go there.
So I will say is, like, I guess months ago I jokingly told our mutual friend, like, get me on this podcast. I was annoyed about one specific session, and then I started to listen more after I spoke with Yossi, and I actually have seen your thought process or your journey evolve. But I also think that, and I said this to you offline, but I want to repeat it just so then it's true. I believe your voice carries, and I believe that and maybe you do know this, but it carries probably further than you actually know, in the way of the willingness of people listening to your insight based on your journey and based on your actual properties of healing. You exude someone who takes care of himself and is willing to do whatever it takes to do so. And many people admire that. And when doing that, there's a certain level of responsibility, let's call it, that whether you want it or not, you got it. And then the podcast probably gives you that much more, because now you get to express the feelings or the thoughts or the experiences on a much deeper and probably a bigger pedestal than just being at a kiddush on Shabbos, right, and sharing it with 10 friends. So I guess the thing that I carry is this. I want to start off by saying that I do believe that plant-based medicines across the board have tremendous value, and I'm not the guy that's going to come on, yours or anyone else's podcast and say, like, they're drugs, stop using them. They're against halakha, whatever arguments that have been brought up. I just think that, and I said this, I think that if I could give you a mashal, if I give you an analogy for it.
Yeah, you can go straight for it. I'm not.
Yeah, which is like, I think you've had a tool belt that's been built over your years of recovery through every experience that you've had. And I think that the medicine gave you I don't want to assume this, but I would say, based on listening enough, that sounds like the medicine has given you a roadmap or an architectural drawing on how to build, and you now know where to grab each tool to start building as you're building. But I think a lot of people that do it don't necessarily have that tool belt, which is where my concern comes from.
Okay, so start with, and you don't have to worry about being direct. It's okay to, like, you're here, I invited you, I understand what I was walking into. Or what you were walking into is perfectly okay. So you said there was something early on, like a few months ago, that got you worked up.
Yeah.
So what was that specifically? And let's make sure the microphone is as much as possible.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you just want it directly in the line of your mouth.
Sounds good. Is it better?
Yeah, yeah, when you hear.
You got it.
Yeah.
A friend of mine called me and says, you have to listen to this podcast. The guy mentions my name, not me, him. So I don't, mentions my name. And this guy was a foundational piece within, I would call it a 12-step community. And we spoke about him going to do medicine, or whatever you want to call it, drinking. And he had an experience that was profound, one that changed his life, one that gave him a roadmap, at least for the time being. And when I listened to the podcast, I felt that it was, it sounded like when my buddies call me when they're done with a 2-day session of whatever
Ayahuasca, let's say.
Yeah, and they want to express what they've experienced, so then they could bottle it up, right? They want to tell me what their newfound commitment to life is and what they're going to keep to, and the excitement, I guess, in that conversation had me annoyed, because what about the come down? What about the reality that this community breaks apart and you go to your job on Monday, that person goes to theirs, they go to their family, their wife now still screams at them, and that's what drove them to whatever those things are. And the consequences of those things for other people, I don't know if they're being talked about amongst the people that maybe are finding healing along the way and staying apart.
But is that unique to plant medicines? For example, in your experience, you spoke about being sober for many months. You're on this cloud. You share it with your wife. She's not joining you on this cloud.
Yeah.
And then you have a crash landing, right? So in some way, if you were in that same setting with a group of 5 or 10 people, then you guys feel like, you can walk on water.
For sure.
But then in practice, when you come back to the real life, it takes time to find your footing and to integrate those experiences into real life. I don't know if that's unique to plant medicine, unless you feel like
it's not unique to plant medicine. But what I would say what is unique to it is the idea that there's more needed than just that experience. So if I go to therapy, I think this was said also on a podcast, it was, if I go to therapy, there's not as many therapy sessions in the world that could give you what ayahuasca could give, right? Is what I've heard it.
Right. What I said is that people often say that ayahuasca is 500 sessions of therapy. What I've said is not exactly, because it's not like 500 sessions would get that. It can open up something entirely new, not something that would even come up in 500 sessions.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess what I'm saying is that some people that are going to do it don't have the therapy session of even knowing that they had a problem with God, let's just say, or hopefully they knew that going into there, but knowing what their rooted issues are and how they have been able to cope along the way. I think that someone coming from a recovery standpoint, right? Let's just use, because it's been part of the conversation, someone coming from a 12-step environment has certain tools that regular Yassi in Japan doesn't have, right? Or Maishi in Australia. So I believe that when it's being spoken from you, or even some of the guests that are coming with other tools prior to...
So bring me back, because the one that bothered you, I didn't quite understand what What bothered you? You said
So
someone called and said their name was on it.
Yeah, I guess. And
Was I criticizing someone for a position?
No. It was me criticizing. I know where it was coming from. It was coming from a place of, first of all, losing some of my community. So I'll tell you, a resentment that I would carry, or something that I saw as saying I needed to work through, was losing pieces of my community to plant-based communities. Yeah. And then when working through that and realizing, hey, it's their lives, their journeys, like, let them go. If I really care that much, I could go as well, right?
Right.
It was realizing that some of the people that were going were in search for more, but they didn't have anything to search with. They didn't have a candle, they didn't have a feather, and they didn't have a spoon. And when they were going, they were coming back naked and afraid. They had no tool to be able to help them work through whatever their experiences were. And I think that the culture around it, specifically, I could speak about Miami and LA, right? It's like, there's a lot of people doing it today. Like,
at this point in time, there's a lot of people doing medicine. That's correct.
And with that it's spreading. And as it's spreading, there's no and it's been beautiful. You've been the voice of kind of reason and direction, I would say, for at least people that I know. And I think that with that voice comes with that responsibility of, I heard your podcast with, I forget the guy's name, but he said, there's no such thing as integration in the world of...
Zach Gould?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was great, by the way. I like that guy a lot. I listened. Yeah, he was really, really... I loved his energy, right? And when he described that, it felt so right to me. It's like, no, everyone keeps talking about we got to help integrate. And it's like, you're again, I know nothing about, I'm not pretending. But yeah, that's what tools are, is integrate, right? Integration is taking tools or grabbing tools post ayahuasca, let's call it. And I don't think that that's being
right.
talked
What he was
about
trying
enough.
to say is that what I understood he was trying to say is that we're kind of separating it as two things. We're saying there's this ayahuasca journey, and then we have to integrate it. Where there, it's supportive of a whole life. And the analogy I gave to it was, kind of 12 steps. Even if you gave someone just the raw, here's the book of AA, go read it. And that's all. You can't talk to anyone about it. You can't, don't discuss it. Just make all your decisions in your life based on this book. I guarantee you it can help you get sober. They're going to miss the mark in many different ways. Whether it's the way they communicate with people about their recovery, whether it's the way they lean on people, it can be whether how they share their resentments or do their resentment list. A lot can go haywire. Who do they do their fifth step with, for example, right?
Yeah.
That can some people do it with their wife. Yeah. I've had to share with a lot of people this idea that your wife is not meant to be your support system. Like, that is a very difficult place to be if every time you want to use, I know was it common in your circles to use kind of bookending, where someone would say, let's say, I'm going to work, I'm leaving to the office, and then let their sponsor know, okay, now I made it to the office. No. Or I'm leaving the office, and now I arrived home. Kind of bookend trips, because sometimes leaving to the office can become a detour to a massage parlor, let's say, right? So it was common to kind of use, that was a common tool that I heard. I never used it, but
You heard it in the community.
Yeah, heard it in the community. A lot of people were using this tool. I don't think I ever would have felt comfortable inconveniencing I would have felt like I'm really inconveniencing my sponsor. But if someone needs to lean on it, God bless. I shouldn't have even said that. It's 100%. Whatever someone needs to do to get sober, the sponsor is signed up for it, the group is signed up for it. Like, don't worry about inconveniencing anyone. Just get sober. And then we'll figure everything else out from there. So, where was I going with that thought? So someone would share that with their wife, let's say, and say, "Oh, you know what? I'm gonna let you know. I left to the office and I made it. No. Oh, I was really triggered. Someone came by the office today. They triggered me like crazy, but don't worry. I got on my knees and did a prayer. I'm feeling much better." Right, like that's a lot to put your wife through. Yeah. Right, like the ups and downs of those emotions. Put a friend in recovery put it to a therapist, like don't do it to the person married to you. That you may not get that in the book. They may not have known to spell it out. They may not have known people can be that smart. So, but in the process of meetings where we're speaking and we're sharing our lives, someone is going to bump into the stupidity of that. I won't say the stupidity, it's the wrong word, but the inconsiderate nature of that kind of decision. Like, let me make my wife my accountability partner. And a lot of people make this mistake. But we won't find it in the book, but we'll find it in real life. Or the book was written in the 1930s and uses language that we don't quite use today on the one hand. And we also have this whole, it's a different world. The jobs are different. The world is different. Technology is different. And how do we work with this? So we wouldn't say, okay, read the 12 steps and call me for integration. That's not the way we do it. We're say, okay, come into this culture. And in this culture, we have meetings, we have fellowship, we have books we read. Sometimes we hang out together. There's just this, you're going to have one-on-one meetings with your sponsor where you're going to go through the book. At some point in time, your sponsor may hand you off to another sponsor if he feels he's more appropriate. He may recommend that you need 2 programs at the same time. And it's not just AA, but you also need GA because, right? So you're now swept up in this whole culture and community versus saying, okay, read the 12 steps. And if you ever feel like you need to, call me. I'm going to help you integrate it. No, it's a whole community integration. That's what I was sharing with him, the way I saw it from the 12-step side. But I think he was saying on the medicine side that, yeah, there isn't, hey, come do an ayahuasca ceremony and then call some guy for an hour integration. There was no such thing. It was just, we don't call it integration in the 12 steps, for example. We don't say that.
Of course not.
It's just, you're just swept up in a different community, different culture. Suddenly your friends change, your conversations change, the books you're reading change, and that is the integration.
It sounded to me, and maybe in some regard, the medicine in the way that it was being talked about in that conversation, that it's a lifestyle. It's not an experience.
Yes.
And so I equate it more to like religion. Like we have Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, like you go through El to then eat, and then you integrate it through, and you go through different stages of that, of your year, and it's a journey of your year that bookends it and allows you to experience those things and then maybe work on those things for the following year.
Right. So in some cultures, yes, that is because their religion and their lifestyle and the medicine is all one. Over here, we're taking something and saying, okay, how do we adopt it or adapt it to our lifestyle and religion, right? Which could look very different than the way tribes are using it or the way these cultures or religions are using it. We want the benefits of it, but we're not looking to get into the whole life, which is not too different than, say, where 12 steps started. 12 steps early on was indistinguishable from, I forget which group, but some group within Christianity. And then eventually they said, okay, can we separate the two? And can we have something that's compatible with anyone's way of life? And I think that's what some people are trying to do with medicine is, I'm not looking to live in Peru and live the way those, people live with their belief systems and everything else. I just want to take some core ingredient from it and then integrate it into my life. So it doesn't have to take over someone's religion necessarily. I would see it more as 12 steps, right? We're 12 steps. If someone is Christian, it's going to make them a better Christian. If someone's Muslim, it's going to make them a better Muslim. If someone's a Jew, it's going to make them a better Jew.
So there's about 15 people in my life that I speak to monthly, let's just say on average, who say to me, so you ready? You told me that I'm going to be there for your first journey, and like I look at it as like it's a shliach, like you put on film today, right? Like right. The same cultural concept of you have to have what I have to make what I have feel whole. That's how it feels from someone who's very involved in all sorts of growth. Like, there's whatever those things are. I go to intensives. I do, holotropic breath work, which I could talk about how the fact that that's sober ayahuasca and we could debate that for a while with some fun love. But there's these tools that are beautiful out there, but yet that community feels to pressure me, let's just say, as someone who's sober with 4 kids and could easily, who's to say I'm not going to have the wrong experience and go back to heroin, right? So that idea is, I guess I live by the idea of attraction rather than promotion, right? The saying, and I don't know if you ever heard
Yeah,
this.
I'm very familiar with it, yeah.
So attraction rather than promotion. And it feels like the community we're developing within our community has become promotion over attraction.
Well, attraction's hard because for attraction, you got to work on yourself. Promotion, we can just talk about it. But what I would say,
I guess we're more on the same page than I thought. Okay, we're getting somewhere.
but I guess what I would say is that is normal within the early stages of anything, right? Like you said with recovery, you get into it and all of a sudden everyone needs to be in this. We all kind of become evangelists for it early on. And eventually it sits within us. I'm very grateful that early when I got into medicine, it was very difficult for me to find medicine. It just wasn't available to me. I didn't know where to do it. I didn't know who to do it with. And even when I wanted to, I was very moved by these experiences that I was having. It would take me months to be able to have another experience, to schedule it. Oftentimes I was traveling to Costa Rica for these experiences. It just became very, very difficult. And today it's kind of everywhere. And I'm grateful that I'm not in the early stages of it when it's this accessible, because it's possible I would have had many more experiences than were necessary. But what I've also found over time, as people get into it and continue to work with it, first of all, I think it was Sam Harris who said this on a podcast. He said, no one should recommend plant medicines until they've had a difficult experience. So that's a question everyone should ask, is who is this person recommending? Because if all you've done is like roll around in the hay and laugh, then you don't know where I may go, because I may go to like 1,000 depths of hell on my experience. So what he says, like, unless you've had a difficult experience, don't recommend, because you don't know what you're recommending. You don't know where someone may go to. So that's one part of it. But in general, I think that moves out of the way over time. The same way I've become with the 12 steps, you become with the 12 steps, is, hey, like, if there's something you hear that you like, then I'm happy to talk to you about it. But at first I wanted to make it mandatory in every yeshiva to learn the 12 steps, right? You probably did also.
100%. I dropped off at every yeshiva doorstep.
Mandatory reading, everyone should read the 12 steps.
100%.
And really what we're saying is we needed 12 steps more. We do a lot of projection.
100%. I guess that's where my passion behind this comes from, is through my own mistakes, right? Just like you're saying, we both had that, hey, let's go to every yeshiva, we should be speaking to every kid, etc. The same idea comes from, hey, we are right now going to every yeshiva. We're going to every Kiddush club and talking about it, right? We're arranging ceremonies with inviting our entire circle to it, and whoever's willing to come is going to come. And if you don't come, you're going to feel like you were left out, because it is a beautiful, powerful experience. Sometimes hard, sometimes rolling in hay. And I think as someone who naturally struggles as a human, and maybe this is the addictive side of me, but I feel like it's most of our culture today, with the fear of being left out and an inferiority complex and why me's and all of those things that today, social media has created. You're giving me an opportunity to connect, Right. You're giving me an opportunity to connect. And I'm going to say, no, you're going to be doing it also. This guy's doing it. Could you believe he's doing it? Honey, I have to go. Look at the roster. I can't be left out of this. And I think that culture is so scary to me for many people. And again, I say it in the most loving way.
No, yeah. I'm not challenging it necessarily. I think this is what Zach Gould spoke about, and some of what he saw as kind of the phases of it, right? Is something starts, and obviously initially there was a door that needed to be broken down. There was a lot of resistance to it. when it could really help people. And I've seen straight miracles with this. There's no question.
As have I, by the way.
Yeah, you can listen to the podcast. But if I had to sum up my opinion on it, just in one sentence, is that the same way we are willing to look at psychiatric medication, drug rehabs, 12 steps, psychotherapy, or whatever else it is, when it comes to healing, we should put psychedelics in that conversation. We shouldn't have resistance around it because of these idol worship concepts, either because more often than not, it's not a real argument. And even if it is a real argument in some instances, there are many instances which you can completely eliminate any question around it. Someone eating a handful of mushrooms by themselves or with a practitioner in a room, there's no concerns of idol worship. But many of the people who criticize plant medicines and some rightful concerns around ayahuasca and different ways that those are those ceremonies are held, and they may have questions. They say, "Oh, you can't do it because of avodah zarah." But when you talk to them about the mushrooms, they'll have all of the same challenges. So whether it's idol worship or whether now obviously there are conversations in the U.S. around legality and things like that, and more are opening up, and we'll see where it goes. But those we shouldn't be closed off just because we've heard of all these, just because of the programming for years, kind of like the war on drugs threw this into the same category, and the war on spiritual experience in a religious community has thrown this into a category. So what I'm encouraging is, no, let's find a way to do it legally, find a way to do it halachically if that's concerned, if it could be helpful to you, meaning just have it in the same way someone would look at a drug rehab or the 12 steps. And it should be pointed out, I think, you may know this, but 30, 40 years ago in the Frum community, 12 steps was considered completely off limits. And Abraham Twersky took a lot of heat for changing this conversation. And there were questions: can people go to churches? And eventually, some rabbis concluded, don't go into the main sanctuary, right? But if needed in a church basement or in a side room or something else, if there's a 12-step meeting, by all means, you can do that. It's saving one's life. That's not the same as saying everyone should go to 12 steps and this is great. I've seen a lot of people get damaged going into sexual recovery programs. I'll give you one way, just an obvious way. Someone comes in struggling with pornography, and that's the only thing they're struggling with. And you walk around a room full of people recovering from sex addiction, and the kind of war stories you hear are way past pornography. And all of a sudden, you open someone up to a whole world of things that are completely unhelpful to their healing process. And I've watched it happen. I've watched it on a number of occasions as someone steps in for one thing and all of a sudden gets introduced into all sorts of other stuff. And the fact of the matter is when we're walking into when you walk into a hospital, you run the risk of infection. When you walk into a recovery meeting, you run the risk of another kind of infection. And when you walk into medicine communities, you run the risk of infection. They're all there. So all I'm encouraging is to say, let's have this as an option just like anything else. And of course, right, like I said before, around legality, and that does have to be taken seriously and with consideration. I think some people have gotten loose around that as well. But those things also have to be taken extremely seriously. All of it should be, but have the conversation around this. And I think over the course of time in the U.S., certainly RFK Jr., who may have a prominent place in American health, is a proponent of psychedelics, and he's a 12-stepper.
100%.
And he said he's seen amazing things with his, I think it was with his son, incredible healing. So that's all. At that moment in time, I felt like it needed a certain push to make it one of the available choices for those seeking healing. It doesn't have to be relegated to the back room or just those people who are near suicidal and what do you have to lose? No, have this conversation. It doesn't mean it's right for everyone. And now this is what Zach Gould was talking about, is we're in another phase of this. And that has happened, right? That no one needs my voice anymore to say this. My voice, if it could be useful, if anything would be in a different way, which is what Zach was saying, is okay, what discernment is necessary here? how do we do this in an appropriate way? Also, there's a lot I can say about it. For another thing is people lump everything into the same category of plant medicines, everything. So people are throwing MDMA suddenly as plant medicines. MDMA is not the same. And I know people who've done it. I've had experiences myself. Several experiences I think could be helpful. The protocol from MAPS calls for 3 experiences with 10 therapy sessions. That's what they've studied. Not 7 to 10 a year.
For sure.
For multiple years, right? That's not the protocol. That's not what people have found helpful. And the experiences are way too predictable to actually be considered therapeutic. At some point in time, that can become addictive, unlike some other experiences. So, I mean, I can go into a lot of different concerns around it.
And I think that I would just say, I think that something that you said a couple minutes ago that I want to touch on is the idea of someone going into a 12-step program and essentially getting worse, right?
Yes.
I would say it's like, as someone who lived in California during what I call is like the rehab boom, there were kids coming from all over with paper cuts and leaving with gunshot wounds, right? They were coming in not fitting the mold of a community, without labeling any communities specifically, but communities, and being told, you smoke too much pot, go to rehab, right? You go to rehab. And I will say for myself, I, as a young guy in recovery and on fire, I was in there, giving them open heart surgery, trying to save their lives, but all they needed was a Band-Aid.
Right.
And I was so misguided by my own desire to help that I was clouded by the idea that I just didn't know, right? And someone who's sitting on the outside and watching, I guess, from the other lens of this camera, is seeing is loving what he is seeing in a lot of different ways, right? The idea that this community has developed and blossomed in this way this quickly is one of the most powerful movements. I'm saying, there are people who have tried making much bigger movements than this and have been much less successful. My whole thing is, with something as delicate as this, the idea of organization is needed. I feel that the voice of just as an example, right, is like the idea that like the person deciding if you're going on a journey is like the person who is saying, like, there's a practitioner that you don't know that your friend told you about, and I have some friends who literally were suicidal because of a shaman and what he did to him in his life outside of a ceremony. And thank God he's healthy now and doing great, but we give so much power to these individuals. And the reason why I do think that the slight difference between the 12-step and specifically plant-based, and let's remove like MDMA, it could just because that's just that person that's going deeper into the rabbit hole and just trying to find more at this point. But I'm talking about this culture, right? Is that what I see? Where was I getting at?
You're saying how this is more than 12 steps.
Oh, is that if I was a better listener, I would have seen that 12 steps was actually telling me not to do some of the stuff that I was doing, right? Whether it was like promotion rather than attraction, et cetera. And that's where I don't, like, there's no one defining that line right now. There's nobody, at least from what I'm understanding, there's no guidance in what we're trying to bring to or what you and many others are trying to bring to the community. And I feel like that discernment, right, to use that term that you guys used, is so needed. But then at the same time, how do you ever control it at that point? How do you ever provide the guidance of what is healthy when anyone could essentially be someone to distribute medicine if they're willing to?
Right. So I'm seeing from my own world, right? And I haven't been around this long. I mean, it's even, in some ways, it's, I don't know if the right word is embarrassing, but it's kind of bizarre that, I was seen as a voice on this topic when I have so little experience with it, right? 5 years with these incredibly powerful tools is a virgin, essentially. It's not, this is not, I'm I don't consider myself someone experienced. Even Zach, who's been around with it for, I don't know, let's say 15 years or so, which, you know, in our world, it's like, wow.
It's like dog years, right? When ayahuasca years, it's like 10
No,
times.
it's incredibly long, but for him, I don't think he sees himself that way. But the fact of the matter is that there aren't that many people with that much experience. But from my little world, what I've seen is certain people embrace this as a path, because in some ways the medicine does self-correct for a lot, right? People who abuse it suddenly are going to have an experience where, I mean, these are powerful tools where it just becomes clear, hey, not here. Like, this is not, don't play with this. Don't play with this. This is not worth it. Not here. Not that no one could, but that wake-up call often happens. Some choose to ignore it, but that happens. So those who take it seriously really engage within a lifestyle way, and I find that they start becoming much more careful about every experience that they engage in. Do I need this one? Is this one necessary? Why am I doing it? Who am I doing it with? You know, it becomes much more precision. I mean, for myself, for ayahuasca, I haven't had an ayahuasca experience in over a year and a half for a number of reasons. But, it's not the only, I'm not the only one like that, right? It's saying, okay, there was a period of time where I felt it was necessary. It was opening things up. And then it's, hey, I got the messages. Let me, you know, a common, just like in recovery, we have these sayings. In the psychedelic community, one of the sayings is, when you get the message, hang up the phone. I'm not saying I got the message. I'm not saying I hung up the phone. But there was enough there that I need to go back for more. It's like, okay, I got these messages and I haven't integrated them yet. And I've learned that in the medicine space, reminders don't come nicely. Like, the first way it's said is not the way it's said second time. So it's, hey, we already did this class. Like, why are we doing another one? So obviously you needed to hear it in a different way. So maybe we'll drag you a little bit deeper. Like, we'll grab you by the lapels this time. And it's like, okay, respect. I got to respect this space. And then others get off the train very quickly. They saw too much. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking to upend my life. I got it enough. I understand it. And I'm walking away. So I see a lot of that, meaning it's not everyone who does it just because a few friends get excited, all of a sudden jump into it. That's not to say that there aren't real risks around it, even in the one or two times where someone could get very derailed very quickly, and it's important to have the right support system. And I think that now's the opportunity for that, for people to start talking about this and start having these conversations. I see it much the same way as 12 Steps, that this is not a conversation with a therapist. This is, communities will form around this. I think communities are forming around this, where people who have leaned on plant medicine for different openings in our life are then saying, okay, how are we working with these tools? How are we integrating into lives? How are we changing as a result? How are we communicating with each other? And then that doesn't become integration. That's just, you get swept up in a community that's already engaging with these tools. And I think it'll self-correct. I mean, we're early on in this process, but I do think it'll go in a good direction.
But don't you believe that most people have found the 12 steps through, again, maybe not directly a professional, but it's not, I would say the majority of people that I know that have gone to 12 steps and it's stuck was not like, oh, you know, I remember there's something that's called AA. It's like, no, whether it's the court system, their wives, their whatever, sent them to some sort of system that gets them into a 12-step meeting that lands them there to keep them there, rather than just searching like, how do I not watch porn tomorrow, or how do I not drink tomorrow?
Right, but we're also talking about a community that's been developed over 100 years, right? AA started in the 1930s, right? So what has happened over those 100 years that it got to this place that now it's, you know, for example, right? If someone in our community, someone who knew you or knew me, found the 12 steps and got really excited about it, they couldn't run into your Shabbos table or my Shabbos table and just, oh my goodness, you don't understand about this whole 12 steps. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I've gone to probably 500 plus meetings. I do. I'm familiar with this concept. I understand why you're excited by it. Let me share with you my experience and how this early excitement has kind of landed for me in my life, and maybe it'll help you. So I think the same thing is going to happen in medicine. A lot of people have jumped on board very quickly, and they're sitting around in circles where they're suddenly the most experienced. Like happened with me. I didn't get walked in by anyone,
Of course.
right?
The show Billions or no?
I did see the show Billions. Yeah.
No, I was going to say,
What?
because they go on a journey. I thought that's what walked you in. I was just teasing.
No, for me, it felt very, I can share
Yeah.
with you my experience. So I was a big fan of Gabor Maté and his work, Compassion and Inquiry, and around in the realm of
Very
Hungry
familiar,
Ghosts.
yeah.
And I think the book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts came out right around the same time that you and I started recovery. I got really into his work. I was following him. At some point in time, approximately 2018, he did a podcast with Tim Ferriss. And he shared his experience with it, where Gabor Maté wrote this book. And I know many ways, persona non grata, he said things on Israel, but it's just my story.
Yeah.
Okay? Don't get too excited.
No.
His
called
comments on Israel before October 7th weren't so nice either.
Exactly. I did call because I know people who know him really well, and I was just like, could you tell him to take that down immediately? Like, what is he thinking? But I want you to finish your point, but I'm going to bring that around first afterwards, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Yeah, my interview with, I interviewed Gabor
Yeah.
Maté, and I asked him that question, how people should be able, what does he recommend to people so that they can listen to his message on healing without getting lost in his messages on Israel, where he's never going to convince them. And he gave an interesting answer, but in any event, the Rambam does say separate the message from the medium. So if you like the message, good.
Fact.
Don't worry about the medium of the message. So Gabor Maté is on this podcast with Tim Ferriss, and what he said is that he wrote this book on addiction, so he's being schlepped around the world to give talks on addiction, and he starts getting a few questions. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And over, what do you think about ayahuasca? What do you think about ayahuasca? And he's like, I don't think anything of it. I don't know anything about it. Eventually, he got the question so many times, he's like, I got to try this, right? And kudos to a guy in his 70s who's willing to try ayahuasca for the first time. He goes, and he's like, wow, this is amazing, like incredible, the healing. He got so excited about it, he started leading ayahuasca ceremonies, I guess like bringing shamans in Canada, until the Canadian government reached out to him and said, stop, like this is not cool. So he started bringing people to South America to do it there. And what he said on the podcast was that the number one treatment for addiction that he's seen is ayahuasca. So obviously, here I have a guy who I'm following for 5 or 6 years. He says that my ears perk up. At the same time, I was sober. So I was sober for several years when I heard this podcast. So it wasn't like I was running looking for healing in that way, but I did still have an incredible amount of anxiety. And I didn't feel like recovery was making enough of a dent in it. Like around the edges, I had some tools to deal with it, but it was always there. And there were times, like brief periods, where I experienced life without it. I was like, wow, this feeling I had on the weekend, can I have it always? Like, nothing changed. My situation was the same before and after. What's missing that I have this problem with anxiety? So that was a bug in my ear. Then secondly, my wife shares with me shortly after this podcast, I was like, okay, like I'm going to schlep my wife into another world with this. Like, that's not going to be a fun conversation. She shares with me that some people she knew, a couple who was struggling, did an MDMA journey together, and it was very healing for them. Their relationship has been much better. Turns out now, fast forward, it's done nothing for them. But she,
we're getting closer.
but she shared that.
Yeah.
Not that it made it worse. It just,
I know, I'm teasing.
it was a halo, and then disappeared. Anyway, so that was his second experience. I'm like, okay, I got 2 sides. Then my wife and I go on vacation to France, and we run into this guy there. Someone's vacation, you're more open, and he's sharing how he had a sex addiction. He was on his honeymoon. He had a sex addiction, and he didn't use 12 steps to heal, but he did work with a lot of plant medicines, and it's helped him tremendously. And here he was getting married, and he was a guy who clearly he'd done a lot of work. Like, you can see it. You can see it in someone when they've put the work in and they've really gone deep on certain things. And he said that plant medicine was an important part of it. So to me, I took that as, okay, I got 3 signs in a very short period of time. I'm willing to do it. I had no idea where. I come back from France. True story. I come back within a week. I get a call from someone and say, I have no idea why I'm calling you. I didn't know them that well. I have no idea why I'm calling you, but I just wanted to let you know about this practitioner that I've worked with. And now I've understood that on a medicine experience, she got the message to tell me about it. And she said, hey, here's a practitioner. I have good experience with them. I didn't know this person. Like I said, I didn't know this person super well. I've had maybe a few hours of interaction with them in my life.
Unbelievable.
So I said, okay, I made the decision. I get a name of someone who's trusted enough. You know, I know this person's still alive, right? And I went for it, and the rest is kind of history. But even I wouldn't say anything on the podcast for about 2-3 years, probably 3 years after my first experience. I wanted to get a sense.
Because you didn't want to be judged because of it, or you didn't want to give a false sense of what it could do?
A full sense of what it could do. Yeah. Especially on a wider scale. Like, personally, I shared some experiences, but even that took time.
Yeah.
Probably took a year before I was talking to anyone about it. I figured out what this thing was. I was really curious about it, and I saw some things that were amazing, but I wasn't sure. So I spoke to very, very few people about it. And slowly I started developing more and more confidence. But also, I wasn't comfortable sharing it from a podcast. But eventually it felt right.
Could I also ask, like, when you describe that anxiety that was felt prior to the ayahuasca, were you using other, let's call it therapeutic tools besides just 12-step and meetings? Like, now I know you'd have all these other tools. Did you have those tools then also, or were they not something that were entertained?
I mean, I'd done a lot of other things. So like EMDR, I'd done a ton of EMDR therapy. I worked with a breathwork practitioner for a couple of years, like as a coach, and we did a lot of work. He helped me manage my anxiety. Like, I stopped getting panic attacks.
Yeah.
A lot of tools to wake up in the morning, do this breathwork, but I wasn't getting at the root of it at all.
Gotcha.
And I needed a few intense panic attacks on medicine to be able to get through it. Like, basically to take me really deep into the anxiety where there was nowhere else to go but swim in it.
Yeah.
To release it.
So it's so interesting to me, because as I'm hearing you express your journey across it, which I want to understand something, journey, which, if we remember, because I think it's one of the things that get confusing for me. But when I think of my journey of healing from 12-step and being in a place where, you know, in the recovery community, there are different retreat style things, whether it be a 12-step retreat, a therapeutic retreat, to this. I was invited to a psychodrama retreat. I have 2.5 years sober. I think I'm, 12 steps saved my life, everything, blah, blah. I know therapy. It's easy, Right. They're like, oh, dude, we're renting this house in Malibu. It's sick. We have a chef coming. We have this. We have that. All I was thinking is 5 days away from my kids, like 5 days away from work. I could say it's a work thing, like I'm going. And I signed up to this thing, and we get in a room, pretty large room, about this size, and 10 guys, all work in treatment in some capacity. And one guy, basically, she walks us through 5 exercises, and a guy ends up in a chair across from his mom and ends up in the craziest moment I've ever been a part of in someone's life. And it was like, all right, who would like to drop in next? And I'm like, ready. I don't even know. I just was like putting up 2 hands. Like, I didn't understand any differently. And that day I ended up as a 1-year-old holding on to my father at that point, I think I was 28-year-old Tzvi, pulling me off, and someone was playing God, pulling my dad off of me. So I'm this 1-year-old and legitimately have an experience. When I still go like this, I don't know if you know, in the beginning of the podcast, I was holding my hands like this.
I didn't notice.
And it's when I need support, I subconsciously, I go to this like weird way to hold my own hands, because that's how I separated. And that's how I said goodbye to my dad, which it was I didn't have a relationship. In the psychodrama.
Right.
So like my first experience, out-of-body experience within recovery or within growth came outside of AA, came outside of whatever, a program, a 12-step program. And I chased that feeling like I chased drugs. That freedom that I felt in that moment, I chased drugs. And I went out and I was broke as a joke. I owed a lot of money in the beginning of my recovery. And I went out and spent every dollar I could and every hour I could finding the best of this, because the idea that I could obtain that feeling again was better than any heroin, any oxy, anything I could ever have tried. And I've been screaming from the hilltops, promotion rather than attraction, over these things for a very long time. But I've been doing it through an attractive way, right? Of like, hey, I need help. Well, why don't you go try this? Or why don't you go try that? I think of, the idea of, you said it on the podcast a couple of times, so I'll say it, like the idea of breath work being brought to the JRC that weekend, and,
yes.
and that happening, like that is someone, Clark is known as one of the best practitioners out there. This man is one of the greatest people I've ever met, and can take anyone on any journey they want. And it's about willingness to drop in. And I guess when I'm hearing your kind of journey along the way, I say to myself, could you have accomplished it without the medicine? And that's where I go to. And the reason why I go to is because
why? Why don't I say it to you? Could you have accomplished it without psychodrama?
Well, could I accomplish it with medicine maybe?
Or
without psychodrama?
Yeah, let me take something that you've benefited, but why do I need to? Like, why do I have to be excited about pushing it to the side? It works. It's helped me. It's like, what am I so worried about?
Well, I would say is the reason why I quit is the same reason why you say it's not there yet, right? When you say
what's not there yet,
like the system around it, especially in our community, the idea that like it's not AA yet, right? It's not that 100-year-old program yet. So by not having all that foundation, by spreading it in the way
but that's not going to happen by itself. That's going to happen through people stepping in, right, and doing it.
But AA is not the size that it was 100 years ago either. So I'm saying, well, we are what the plant-based community is size-wise compared to where it should be, in the sense of where we're at with it, is where I see the issue. It's so large, and it's not being contained in any real. It's not being contained of accountability towards either the individual or the process. That's how someone on my side sees it. Again, not my side, from my lens, someone who hasn't tried it, who, I say this all the time, if I didn't have 4 kids living in my house and responsible to pay their bills, I would probably have done it by now and put my money in my wife's name and make sure that I was like free from ruining everyone else's lives in my life.
Right. It's kind of a bizarre place to be for me to almost defend something that you don't have specific experience with. All I would say is that, in what I was trying to, and by speaking out, what I was trying to do is put it in the same category as everything else. Like, why does it need some sort of special category where we need all these heterim, so to speak, in order to look at it? If you believe it can work for you, and yes, everyone should do the due diligence, and anyone who listens to the podcast long enough will hear me say it over and over. There's no one who encourages appropriate use of something more than someone who respects that, right? So meaning, hand in hand with me respecting this medicine, these medicines are also encouraging appropriate use around it. And I hope that people who listen to me take that from me. At the same time, I don't think it needs more of a defense than, like you said, like psychodrama. Like, could I have accomplished it? Maybe yeah, maybe no, but why do I need to? Why do I need to? It was a perfectly appropriate way for me to get where I was trying to get to. It wasn't for lack of trying. What I would say today, where I sit today, is if I'm stuck on something, I will try to use everything else before I go to plant medicines. Because it's often the most confronting. Not because I think not it's bad, it's just in some way the most difficult place to do the work. I don't get to, it's not at my pace, it's not at my, once I say, help me with this, a few times when I've taken ayahuasca, the feeling was, you signed up for class, you're coming to class, and we tell you when it's over. And that's a scary place to be. I mean, it's being dragged into a dream that you can't end. It's completely on something or someone else's timeline. So it's not a fun place to be, but the question always is, why am I going in there? What is the benefit? What is the benefit for me? And if I'm living with this crazy anxiety and I want to be free from it, then yeah, take me to your class and hang me upside down for the next few hours, make it feel like a few years if you need to, as long as I know I get out and I'm going to be better, meaning I'm signing up for something that I know could be potentially very difficult. Today I understand that. Would it have been nice if I understood more of this going in? Certainly, but I was willing to, right? Maybe that was part of my job, willing to go in. And as far as the community is concerned, there were many people who did it before me, but I didn't have someone in my ear guiding me. I was on my own in many ways, just knocking on doors and figuring out what worked. And if I can make it easier for someone else, by all means. I just don't think, I haven't heard from you anything that says, okay, like this has to be in this special category, other than you don't want to feel left out or something.
100%, and I want to own this, is that that it could come off at moments in our conversation as that, because knowing where that is a piece that has been a part of this conversation, I could acknowledge that and own that. I think the what I would say is what you're saying today is, I'm not doing. Ayahuasca will be the last place I go to for healing because of your reasoning. My whole thing is, why isn't, let's call it psychodrama before ayahuasca?
Why isn't psychodrama before ayahuasca?
Yeah, like for anybody. Forget about just in what you've set boundaries in your life.
Okay, so first of all, I'm saying that now after the awareness I got from medicine.
Okay.
Meaning I'm not saying that before. I've heard one person describe it. I don't know why I haven't heard the term until recently, but that there's an aura around us. You know, the aura, in the same way we'd call it the foreskin, but there's also one over our eyes, so to speak, where we don't understand the world we're living in. We don't. We think it's much more physical than it is. Like, for example, that story you said of praying by the Aron Kodesh for God to give you a sign, and for you to meet someone shortly thereafter, that's the world we live in.
I 100%
Right.
agree.
That's the world we live in.
But I didn't need ayahuasca to tell me that. I've experienced that in my life.
I hear you.
Okay.
I did. Despite recovery and despite everything else, there was a very, very thick aura that I was interacting. I just, if I can feel it and touch it, it existed. If I can measure it, it exists. If not, just don't. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And I needed this to be broken through. After that's broken through in concept, now I have a specific area that I want to focus on. I'm like, okay, let me try what I could. I should say about psychodrama. So Mayor Collinson and I lead these retreats, Adama. We don't use any medicine. Outside of tobacco, we don't use any medicine. And psychodrama.
I got the link.
Yes. Psychodrama is a very important component of it. Mayor's a practitioner of sorts with it. He's done a ton of retreats, huge fan, and I've watched the miracle that it is. And I've benefited a lot over the last year plus in retreats, officially as a practitioner, as a facilitator, but actually, getting tremendous benefits from it. A lot of my deepest healing over the last year and a half have been on these retreats. Huge proponent of this. And I'm not here to rank one versus the other. That's not the point. For me, I just think one of the beautiful things now is we have a lot of tools available to us, healing, just a ton available to us. And I see no reason why psychedelics has to be relegated to the back corner of the room after everything else was tried, and if you have no other choice and your life is such a mess anyway, and you've done all the psychodrama and EMDR and therapy and 12 steps and everything else, then go ahead and try this. No, I think that if someone feels that it's right for them based on all of their due diligence and research, then, there's a proper way to do it. There's a legal way to do it. Jump on in.
Yeah.
Jump on in. I don't see why it needs like some.
So I'll try to bring it home
Yes.
in the best way I could, and if I can't, I can't. So the first, anytime I've had this discussion, I try to educate myself on any form of healing that I possibly could, and as I said, I'll jump into any cold plunge to whatever psychodrama thing I possibly can do. That being said, I've tried to understand ayahuasca at its core, right? Or the experience of it by talking to, at this point, hundreds of people who have experienced it. And the common answer is you won't understand until you actually do it. Which it's the common answer, what I would say, of the people who are staunch believers in the what it contains and the gift that it is. And I respect that like so much. Like I love it. Just like we talked about the 12 steps, you won't know what an amends feels like until you make one. Like there's no better feeling than walking out of an amends. Like I believe that, right? Like no matter what, it's such a good feeling. I tend to say that with as little as we know, whether it be, again, the integration or whether what tools people have in their lives or who their practitioner is, it's much easier to harm someone by having the wrong practitioner in plant-based than the wrong practitioner in one psychodrama session, right? There's people like Mayer, who I think we both respect a great deal. Like we had him out in LA a few years ago, right before Shana, doing a breath work for 40 guys that the year before Clark did it, and everyone's like, Mayer's so much better, you know? and it was the connection point, it was the music, what music he used. He was able to revolutionize it, kind of like what you're describing, you're trying to get to. And the way that the reason why I don't say put it on the back, I don't say that at all, but I say someone needs to guide that to the forefront of people's decision making, right? If I'm listening to you or if I'm at a kiddush and someone says, this saved my life, or this, you don't know the insight that it's given me, or my wife finally is willing to sleep with me, whatever the messaging is, I want to try it, and I want to be a part of the community, where I think the community is a healing community. I think anyone who's willing to jump deep in the deep end is looking for healing. And I hate that I actually, see, there's the resentment. I strongly despise the idea that it's surrounded by plant-based and then everything else is the tool that's associated with it. Because breathwork is nowhere near, it might have similar results as plant-based, but breathwork's breathwork, plant-based, and then within breathwork you have holotropic, you have all these different types, forms, etc. My wife and I do breath. She does breath once a week. I do it once a quarter, because the breathwork I want to do is hopefully.
You know how holotropic breathwork became popular?
How?
So in 1970s or so, around the time Richard Nixon called Timothy Leary the most dangerous man in America, when psychedelics became illegal, there was a guy, I think his name is Stan Graff, and he said, okay, how could we offer psychedelics in a legal way? So we began researching it. And he came back with a breathwork that he gave the term holotropic breathwork, but obviously it didn't start in the 1970s. He was just pulling it and saying, hey, in different societies, they use these breathwork techniques in order to reach altered states of consciousness. So because it's illegal, we're going to offer breathwork. So the fact that you're seeing that link is in the original intention.
Yeah, but it's also, I'm saying it's based on my discussions, you know, with enough people who have done both and have had real experiences in both. They call it the sober ayahuasca, right? Like it's like a joking form and
it's different though.
Banter, 100%. And it's been described to me as, I'll explain the description. It's been described as like HD and a 1970s movie. You're never going to forget the HD film. You have it on a thing. This is like, it's fading. Like you had the experience, it's great, but this is a movie you're never going to forget. And this is a movie that stays with you, and you could always go back to it, and you have notes to reflect on it, and it's part of you now, where this is an experience.
Right. You know what's interesting? This is a book called The Immortality Key. And it's a book where, I forget his name, but I didn't read the whole thing, but he talks about how psychedelics, he believes that it existed in kind of ancient religions and was a part of early Judaism and early Christianity and early everything, right, that existed. And at some point in time, it moved to the wayside. Yeah. I think, I don't know if it's his book and other books where they talk about psychedelics would deconstruct the hierarchy that exists in any spiritual movement, because psychedelics give everyone an opportunity to experience the divine, not just the leaders. This is put aside the idea of the shaman for a second.
Yeah.
Even with the shaman in there's a sense that a person can experience, right, can have those kind of experiences by themselves and doesn't need an intermediary like often happens in religion. But in the introduction of his book, he talks about the fact that he specifically didn't do any psychedelics because he didn't want to be tainted by the fact that, you're writing a book on psychedelics and coming to these conclusions, but your mind is not clear because you've done psychedelics. So on one hand, everything I'm saying can easily be discounted because my mind is not clear because I've done psychedelics. And then the argument against you could be, you've never done psychedelics. Right? So how can you say, what I would say is like this, is that while there may be many stories of people who've been hurt by it, I've heard some, I haven't encountered them firsthand. I've heard from this person, that person, but to meet someone firsthand who's had a tremendously negative experience from psychedelics, like a long-term negative experience from psychedelics, I haven't, I don't know if, I know stories of 19, 20-year-old kids who've mixed mushrooms with weed and ended up in psych wards, but, I know of those things. But around like the healing community, in those ways, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, I don't know that many. And I know many, many people whose lives were completely transformed by psychedelics. That being said, I'm not here to disagree with you in any way. I think, on the contrary, there's an important need for there to be discernment, like we spoke about in the podcast with Zachol, for there to be communities around how to practice this appropriately, and for these conversations to happen. I think people have to know you're going in there. Yeah, I mean, I do know story. I'll give you a story, like ones that are more in line with ones I would say, okay, careful when walking in. So I know people who said, hey, what the hell? Other people are doing psychedelics. Why don't I? And here they are and get thrown. One guy told me, I think he got thrown into the most horrible memories of physical abuse with his father. Like horrible, horrible. It changed the whole way he viewed his father, and there was a lot of religious abuse in the way the physical abuse was kind of mixed with a lot of religious abuse and religious messaging around it. And he couldn't put it anywhere. He literally had nowhere to put these experiences. Whereas imagine this same guy who said, okay, I'm going to work on my marriage. I really want to improve my marriage. I want to improve as a father. I want to improve. And I'm entering this realm because, I've heard it could be helpful. I've tried a number of other things. It hasn't worked. Right? Or even independent of I've tried other things. I really want to improve as a father. And then he goes in there, and all of a sudden these memories come up of the way he was parented. Then he has somewhere to put that. And there's a really good why for why he just had to experience all this trauma. And it is traumatic. And now he has to figure out, like, okay, who is my father? What was my childhood? How am I viewing these things? There's a lot of pieces to put together at this point. And I know of a few instances where people didn't understand what they were walking into. They thought it's super cool. I'm sitting at a Shabbos table, and why should I be the one left out of the conversation? Next time it's an ayahuasca journey, I want to jump in. And then they get thrown into that. So, okay, on the one hand, so meaning, is it, like I said, life ruined forever? Are they in psych wards? Is everything? No, that's not what I'm saying. But they've been introduced to something that they really didn't want to and could have easily been known if just the people they spoke to, whether it's a practitioner who they spoke to, just simply asked, hey, why do you want to come here? And that's not a good reason.
Do you think there's two sides of the aisle right now on 12-step in the Jewish community? Like where anti, and pro? Or do you think that now it's a part of our society?
I don't know too many people anti. I think that there's
And so I guess where the foundation of my belief is right now, we have worked so hard at breaking boundaries within the community to provide healthy tools, whether it be breath work, 12-step, etc. All the tools we've mentioned over the course of this podcast. And the one that continuously gets in the way is the medicine in whatever shape or form. And the reason why is because of the culture that is being created around it. And I think that you're 100% right. Never tried it. You're 100% right that, there's no real, it needs discernment, but there's no real, there's no real consequence. Yes, some people might go to a psych ward, maybe not. And that happens everywhere. People go to rehab and end up dead, right? There's consequences to anything that involves healing. I guess where I'm coming from is more from the angle of trying to develop the right size community for the right size product it is today. And I don't think that we have the knowledge to be able to make it the community size that we have made it within our community.
So I guess I'm coming from the standpoint of this is an important conversation and it's an important topic, and this and others like it is what's going to allow it to form, and it's going to form. For sure. I think that if we look 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, it's going to be a part of the community. It's not going to be this incredibly novel thing. Oh my goodness, I went to this place. Like, for example, with my kids, do you imagine this is going to be some sort of a big secret or idea or nothing? It'll just be a tool that's available. That should it be, that's what I imagine, is as they grow up, then this may be a tool that they want to engage with, depending on the circumstances they encounter in their life. And it's not this big to-do around it. Eventually, it just becomes kind of integrated into a life. And I think that the community now is figuring out how to fit this in. And this is different. I'll tell you where it is very different than a lot of other things. 12 Steps had this problem similarly, but this has some qualities that are a little bit different. Is we're dealing with something that's very, very, very spiritual in nature. And how do we fit this into a religion? So 12 Steps had that challenge. Some made the terrible decision of being more comfortable with things like, the group Secular something Anonymous.
Secular Recovery?
I think so, like Secular Recovery. Where
SRA.
They stripped out the spirituality. It's like, okay, we get sober without the spirituality, thinking that somehow that is more Jewish than 12 Steps,
crazy.
Which is what?
It's crazy.
Right, which is really not understanding the 12 Steps, which is very, very compatible. So I think that that's some of what we're wrestling with, is what do we do with all these spiritual experiences? And what do we do with the fact that so many of these come from tribes and cultures that seem to be so different than ours? But over time, I think we're going to figure out where this fits into our life and will be a super important part of it.
But I think it is already a super important part. I think that's where, again, and I'm not looking to like beat a dead horse. I think that's where the view or the I'm saying, hey, this is a super special tool. It is a very valuable tool. And yes, we need discernment. But prior to discernment and prior to all this, where are we today? And today we're at a place where there's a larger community than I think people understand around this. Like,
so maybe it's larger than I understand around it.
I would venture to say that I'm sure you know enough of it, but even with the community that you understand that it is, I think even that is going to be hard to contain at a certain point as everyone goes back to their respected homes.
Right.
There's the next one, and it's, you bring one. Next thing you know, you're a community, and I think that's.
I think on the contrary, I think the novelty gets lost over time, and more people will have heard it, and eventually it will find its place. But there's certainly, to me, what I've seen is that there's certainly a place for these tools in our culture, in our society, in our community, and doing it in the right way is as important to me as anyone else, 100%. And the fact that, this is what Zach was saying on the podcast, which I agree with, and this to me is in the same vein as that, is, hey, we're in a different space now. I don't feel the need to talk about psychedelics on this podcast anymore, as far as the way it's helped me, or the way I'm doing it in this conversation only because you're bringing the opposite.
Of course.
But the way I did 2 years ago, where I felt, hey, it's important, these experiences should be shared, and talking about some of those experiences I had as a way to help others, as a way for people to know this exists, for people to potentially feel more comfortable if it fits for them. I don't think that's necessary anymore. And now there's this new wave of conversation. And for those in the community, I'm sure it's not a total shock. One thing's for sure that everyone sees, this is 100%, everyone sees, is it feels like when it's communicated that take this and all your problems will disappear. And very, very quickly you walk in and you realize that most of the practitioners who are offering their problems haven't disappeared. Right? A lot of them are filled with problems, number one. And number two, even for us, our problems don't disappear. It gives us an opportunity, it opens a door. And if we want to, if we choose to do the hard work and walk through it, then this is something that can help us. And if not, very quickly will be as if we never did it.
For sure.
Everything will go like right back to baseline, which is not much different than rehab. Not much
100%. I would say you can't unlearn what you learn in the rooms, they say. You can't, same thing there, right? It's like the correlation makes so much sense. A lot of examples, a lot of muscles back and forth between rehab, 12-step, because it all is healing, right? It's a search for healing that I think the majority of people want to get closer, right? I said, I've a good buddy, his name's Avrami. I'm going to quote him without his last name, but Avrami, he's someone who's drank, he's someone who's been in 12-step, and he calls me a couple months ago, and he's my favorite, and he goes, I just had a revelation. The opposite of addiction is connection. And he continues to repeat it every day since. And we like tease each other back and forth, and we go back and forth. And that's what we're looking for, is connection. 12 steps puts it to a higher power in a group, etc. Ayahuasca puts it to a higher power in a group. There's no real difference, in my opinion, on what human beings want. I think as a community, we owe it to each other to make it accessible for all, I guess.
To make what accessible for all?
The idea of feeling comfortable when going for healing.
Right. One thing I would say that my understanding of the wave of psychedelics that happened in 1960s, 1970s, which obviously didn't go well. So, like on a physical plane, it didn't go well, which is why it was shut down. And on a spiritual plane, it didn't go well, obviously, because it was shut down. Yeah. Right. So the same thing. Meaning,
we ended up with today.
What?
we ended up with today.
And now there's another wave coming. And how do we make sure, and that's an important conversation, how do we make sure that this time we get the benefits without the negatives? And one thing I would say is that from my understanding of what happened then people were looking for mystical spiritual experiences. Let me understand God. Let me find meaning in the world. Let me understand the way it kind of works behind the veil. Where over here, most people who are entering it are not coming from that perspective. They're coming from this perspective of, I want healing. I want to get better. I want to be better. And very quickly, people who are serious about that realize that this is one tool in the arsenal. It helps. It opens things up for us. But if we're not willing to do the nitty-gritty hard work to get better, we're not going to get better.
Fair.
So, okay. Thank you. Did you feel like this was a debate or?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I felt like I feel that you and I see eye to eye on 95 to 8% of what the discussion is. I think, though, that last bit is what to do with it. And I think that's where we see difference.
Well, if the difference you see is to somehow curb or put the cat in the bag, the cat can't be put in the bag.
No, but I do think that there's just like, I would say, an organization like Amudim, right? Whatever you think of them doesn't matter to me, but what they did was something so amazing, where they educated our communities around addiction and then provided the resource to at least say, this is what our opinion of vetting this system is, whatever rehab or, whatever support group, etc. And they were able to cipher that out. And there is, to me, there needs to be that in this.
Yes. So one of the major challenges in this domain, in this arena, is that a lot of it's underground, or a lot of it's through these religious constructs, right? Which by definition often have to remove certain healing language and components and what they do. So it's religious experiences. So that is certainly problematic. And hopefully they'll be successful to bring this in that it shouldn't be done in that way. And then you can have regulators feedback and this,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, because I know so many people have gone and don't do the diet and like try to cheat the system, and they're doing whatever they can to have an experience, but they never put the time into themselves to actually know what they're signing up for.
yes. And so the two things I would say is, number one, we're not putting the cat back in the bag. Okay.
And I'm agreeing with you.
We're not shutting the internet down. We're not shutting psychedelics down. Like, we're not.
But can we agree that
It would take the force of the U.S. government to shut something like this down. And where the government is headed, it seems going in the other direction.
For 100%.
So that's one. It's not. So now we say, okay, it's here. What are we going to do with it? And I think the more conversation we have, the more tools we can put around it, the more experiences we can share. But a lot of it is going to happen just because it's the truth of the matter, right? So a lot of it just going to happen that as people share more and more experiences, we're just going to see it. The guy's like, oh, it was amazing. I did this ayahuasca experience. Okay, great. And then you're going to see some people who are changed and some people are not changed. And you say, what's the difference? And some people put the work in and some people didn't. And the people who put the work in, so then we're back to where we started before psychedelics, where if you want to change, you have to put hard work, right? But psychedelics does offer us, for many of us, certainly ones like me, which had a very, very thick foreskin between my eyes and the world, we needed to be broken down, and this was a tool that was able to do it. So good. I don't see any challenge there.
I think we came to the understanding that it's the tool that you were lucky enough to use to get you to where you are today.
Right. But I would say not only me.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But I will say that there are other tools, such as myself, that I'm not comparing in no way, shape, or form.
I'm a huge proponent of many of those tools.
Yeah,
certainly.
yeah.
We do breath work at every single one of the trees. We do psychodrama. We do all of these tools. And the more the merrier. The world's open, and let's heal. Let's all heal, and let's bring ourselves all to a better place. We don't need to
And I
suffer
will say
anymore.
those are like the crux of the other. Like there's IFS with polyvagal theory, and like there's other even deeper tools than just a psychodrama in that moment, because that's very much I would say the way you described LSD, like in the sense like it's an experience. It doesn't provide that systematic change within you. It's more now you have to provide that. But there's so many tools out there, and I guess that's my message from what I am bringing, is that you don't, if you're scared of using ayahuasca, any other form of medicine, there's also other forms of healing that can happen through other therapeutic modalities.
So if you listen to my podcast, I talk about many of them. There's just one thing I would say. I was thinking, should I say it, should I not say it? But
please.
Trust it. So earlier in the conversation, you said that if you didn't have 4 kids, then, maybe you try something because you don't want to take something that can just throw you back into an addiction. So when I hear that, I'm not saying it's never happened before. I'm not saying, but it's not my experience of these medicines, not my understanding. It's not in the realm of possibility. Almost like I don't relate to it at all as something that can lead to that can lead back to it in that way. And all I would say, I don't want to call it right or wrong, but I would say if someone is saying that, then their understanding of the medicine is very different than mine.
So we would probably need another 4 hours. So I'm not going to get deep, but I will just say on the most surface level, the reason why I didn't bring this argument to the table is because there's nothing tangibly I could hold to it in this very moment. Because as you said, you're 5 years in. Most people are much less, right? At least half, if not less than half. There's countless people that were in recovery for substance abuse and alcohol. I'm just going to go to that label, who are no longer see themselves as in recovery and now drink and smoke a little weed. Again, to them, drink and smoke a little weed on Shabbos or this, who you see the progression, like the way the book talks about it. I'm not here to judge them. I'm here to just point out facts. Like, I'm going to do ayahuasca once because I can't get what I need out of my 12-step program, to 15 sessions in, and now is drinking and smoking because it's not a big deal. That's my community, and I'm no longer an addict. Like,
Right.
I'm healed, and this is not one person. It is many.
So I did a podcast with someone by the name of Omar Pinto.
Yeah, I watched it.
We spoke about this as his experience. He was 20 years sober in NA.
Yeah.
And did ayahuasca. And after a number of experiences, he felt he wasn't an addict. And I came to a similar place through my experience on medicine, but I just want to qualify that it didn't feel like, oh, I did this many medicine experiences and therefore I'm not an addict. That wasn't what happened with me. What happened with me is during an experience, it became very clear how the label that I was placing myself on an addict was no longer helpful. It was for a period of time, and now it wasn't. So it was a confronting experience, it wasn't an experience, it wasn't a decision I came to. It was an experience that I had on the medicine that, hey, this is no longer helpful for you. Because, without going into all the details, in any case, so we discussed on the podcast Omar Pinto, and he said this. He said that, hey, I've gone back to he drinks occasionally now since then. He's not an addict. So I said, in the 12-step world, they would see this as you relapse and you're for sure heading for a train wreck, right? Because that's the whole paradigm. The whole paradigm is you got to cut it out. And if you go back to it, you're eventually going to relapse. So he said, I haven't yet. So I said, but you don't know if you will or you won't? I guess time will tell, right? And we'll see. To date, I believe his life is going well and it's working for him. Right.
So I just want to clarify something because I feel like this might have been misunderstood. So any meeting I host a 12-step meeting at my office. I host a 12-step meeting on Sunday mornings in my neighborhood. We don't give out chips. We don't give out length of time chips. We celebrate year anniversaries, birthdays, but we don't give out chips. And the reason why we don't give out chips is because the idea that, yes, it is one day at a time, but the idea that I'm defined by the days that I'm sober is so ridiculous to me, because I know way more people that are way unhealthier,
Yes.
20 years in rather than 2. I guess where I sit is not, I don't care if it's considered a relapse or not, but the idea that I could come to the common sense that I could drink again, knowing what I put my family through, even if today I could drink and there's zero consequences of me going to heroin, right? I could drink and I could smoke like I'm a normal yid and nothing's wrong with me. The idea that I would be willing to take even a 0.001% chance of a risk, again, not relapsing through the medicine, but relapsing through revelations, right? Or putting myself in a position of my mindset telling me this isn't a problem, would be so unfair to the people who have loved me and been by my side that I would never put them nor myself in that position.
Right. And that's why I understand that. And these are some of the mindset shifts that medicine gives, and medicine gave me, and I'm sure gave Omar. And he and I found it helpful, but that's why I qualified that it wasn't a decision that, not in his story, not in my experience, that we came to ourselves, right? But the point, the thing is that it's so important to hold on to that idea that for anyone to challenge that would be crazy, right? Meaning, like, for me to sit here and challenge that position, no, that position is very important for you and it's very, very necessary for you. But it didn't feel like I came to that decision by myself. You understand? It wasn't, I would have thought the same way, right, before doing medicine, that, oh, now there's a risk that I wouldn't call myself an addict and I wouldn't go to a meeting and maybe with pornography, it didn't translate to me, just so you understand, it didn't translate in my world as now I can watch pornography from time to time. That wasn't that wasn't the link at all. It was a little bit different, actually. Sure, it was that because I call myself an addict, and I'd started with my podcast using Instagram. So sometimes on Instagram, you can end up in let's say you see a picture of something that's whatever, a meme, or if I tell myself I'm an addict, then I could say, oh, I had a drink, and now I can get lost in a rabbit hole with a full excuse. And the medicine would say, like, no, you don't get to use this addict label anymore. That suggests you don't have choice. You have full choice every step of the way. And own your choices all the way throughout. So you can see a picture. Don't tell yourself, oh, now you're in a rabbit hole. It is what it is. No, if you go to a second and a third and a fourth, you've made the choice every single step of the way. Drop the addict label. It's not helping you anymore. Own your choices. You're a free man. And if you go down that path, it's because you did so as a free man.
So I 100% agree with you on that premise. The thing where we would disagree is that when someone who is using substances, the idea that it's still their choice after going down 3 pages of Instagram, going down 3 shots of whatever, it's not necessarily their same choice that you have. So I think that's where the difference
Okay, listen, if Omar was here, he would share his experience.
Oh, yeah. I'm not here to pick on Omar in any way.
But I think he would say, like, I think he would agree with you if he ended up drunk at any point.
For sure.
Right. I think he would agree with you, like, hey, my theory has proven to be incorrect. The only thing I would say is that embedded in that idea is embedded in this concept of if I have another drink, I will. If I have another drink, I will. There's a fear there. There's a deep fear there. And medicine has given me an opportunity to shed a lot of those fears so that I can live a life without them. And I'm not offering that to someone without the medicine because it doesn't just change one variable. Medicine changes so many variables. And in conjunction with that, I don't know exactly the way Omar got this message, but they don't come light and they don't come without demands. It's not, oh, do whatever the hell you want now. Like you heard, it could have sounded like that when I first started, oh, I'm no longer an addict. It wasn't, I wasn't getting off the hook. I was getting on the hook more, right? When I actually shared my experience, I was placed on the hook more with more responsibility and more ownership of my life and more responsibility and being more careful around everything. So in the process of medicine, those things open up, which for me felt like dropping and shedding a lot of fears and embracing more freedom in my life. And that's an opportunity that some choose to make available to themselves. And I understand the reason not to. I do. I lived in the 12-step paradigm for a long time. I get it, and I benefited from it, and it's something that's difficult to shed and not for everyone to shed. And I don't, if you've seen people who haven't done it well, then by all means, be careful.
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to where you could say the idea that it's not worth shedding when healing has come through non-psychotropic methods, right? Like through
I understand.
So that's where and
right.
I'm
You're
not
attributing
perfect,
value there,
just like any other person. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, you're attributing a lot of value there, which I don't. Right? Like, oh, I healed without it, but at the same point in time, I didn't deal with substance addiction, so I do want to respect that.
Yeah.
That someone who dealt with substance addiction, maybe it's a different.
And that's, I guess that's just like a personal, like, okay, this is why I wouldn't, and I appreciate what you said is, very simple. Like, yeah, it definitely has, there's tons of people like Omar that swear by the fact that, like, dude, I could drink and put it down now where I couldn't have done it 10 years ago when I got sober and etc. And I respect that might be the prolonged effect. And again, that's why I respect the medicine without ever taking it, right? And I've gone to closeout ceremony. I've participated in the culture, and I appreciate it. I guess, yeah. Discernment.
Okay, yeah. I mean, we've said it.
We said it all.
No, we've said the message that needs to be said, and people will take from it what they need and what they must. And I thank you for coming out here.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for the courage to step in, knowing that there'd be a disagreement.
Of course.
Of sorts. Thank you.